Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Sandeep Pednekar, and you're watching One Universe, the show based on the non-profit One Universe that promotes positivity through the promotion of love, peace, and harmony. If you have listened to our show on radio, you will know that we have our guest who we have today has been on the show before and we are going to interview her. But for new listeners, I would like you to introduce yourself. So please, yeah.
I'm Olliette Drobot, born in West Memphis, Arkansas, grew up in Memphis. A mom, stepdad. I'm the oldest of two.
Okay.
No children, married 23 years, but a bunch of nieces and nephews. We got three dogs, three big dogs.
All right.
that are like our children.
Nice.
Yeah, I am the CEO of O2 Strategic Partners, which is a small consulting firm, mostly working with nonprofit organizations that are involved in social justice and policy and advocacy work. So I mainly do facilitation, some training, some project management. So I've been doing that for a few years. Education-wise, went to school here in Memphis College, Memphis Rhodes College, which is a small liberal arts college, and then went to graduate school here too. So I got a master's in business administration and a master's in applied anthropology. I know that's an interesting combination.
It is really good. So, talking about roads, do you remember where we first met?
I think we were going through a leadership training program together, or maybe it was a diversity initiative, I believe it was.
It was at Rhodes.
Okay.
It started at Rhodes, and it was regarding diversity and bringing especially black and white people together.
Right.
And two ladies who were good names, recognized names in the community started something called Zero or Base something. Right?
Right. I'm trying to think of the name of it. Yes.
Right.
It's escaping me right now.
Right. And so after we went through that, a bunch of people who were in that group, so they were divided into, I don't know, 20, 30 groups. And our group decided that we should meet outside of the discussions and all of that. And so we started meeting at restaurants and
each other's houses.
And so that developed into a good friendship. And I think that probably might be somewhere around 2005 maybe.
That sounds about right.
Right?
Yeah.
So around that time, and it has been a while now.
No, right?
And during that time, I remember that you were involved with non-profit in Hickory Hill area.
Right. Yeah. Southeast Memphis.
So, and what was the name of
it was Southeast Memphis Community Development Corporation.
Okay, and so please tell our listeners what it dealt with.
Yeah, so it was community-based. So we were working on blight issues, safety and crime issues, also working with individuals that were about to lose their homes, so foreclosure prevention. And then we did a lot of work in apartment communities because that community has some very large apartment complexes. And so again, talking about crime, a lot of the crime was located in those apartment communities. So we were working with owners and apartment managers out there on various safety strategies.
Okay. And crime always in Memphis has always been on the higher end, and so especially in that area 38115 there is a whole lot of crime. And you are dealing with those issues as well.
Yeah, and especially got involved, but we were doing some good work, and we could see some of the crime numbers going down across the board. But what I recognized is around domestic violence, family violence, those numbers were not going down. And so started to talk with law enforcement, the prosecutors and advocates to figure out, what did we need to do? And so I was basically told you can't use typical crime strategies in order to address family violence. And so I ended up doing a lot of work in that arena.
While you were in that same nonprofit. But in course of time, you switched that non-profit was dissolved, and you were the first executive director of another non-profit that was started. And I remember that Miss Phyllis, you, Nick Clark, and I
Right.
were sitting at 600 Jefferson on the ground floor and discussing the introduction of this non-profit called as Family Safety Center. Was that the name which you started, right?
Yeah.
And what year was that?
I think I went over to the Family Safety Center in 2011.
2011. Okay. So it has been 12 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So why was it started?
Well, one of the reasons, again, I was mentioning that, Shelby County, Memphis has always struggled with crime, and a big chunk of that is around domestic violence. It's about when I was doing work in that arena, it was about a third of the violent crimes were domestic violence. And so, again, you couldn't use typical, crime fighting tactics. And so a group of folks had gotten together, community leaders and others, and then looked at some models across the country. And so there was this model called the Family Justice Center. And so they wanted to replicate it here.
And where was that?
It was a national organization and the first one, I believe, was in San Diego, California. And it got a lot of recognition. I think their claim to fame was they were on Oprah. And so, and they were talking about a lot of the work that they were doing. And someone got wind of it in Tennessee and said, hey, I think we should look at this for Tennessee. And so there was an opportunity for a number of cities to apply for some funding through the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
Maybe that was through I think it was through the Department of Justice. And so Tennessee, Memphis was one, Knoxville was the other city that applied. Unfortunately, Memphis did not get it. Knoxville did. However, they thought it was such a great idea and the strategies would work for Memphis that they decided to move forward. This group of folks decided to move forward with it.
So was Phyllis Betts the initiator of it for bringing over here, or a lead?
I think there was a number of organizations. One, the Shelby County Crime Commission had a lot to do with it. So Bill Gibbons was very involved with it. At the time, Amy Wyrick was the DA at the time. Also, the police director at the time. So were a number of kind of key folks that came together. And I do believe Phyllis Betts and her husband, Richard Janikowski, were a part of the conversations and the efforts to get it going.
So there's a whole lot of history behind that.
A whole lot.
So when were you on Oprah?
I was not. I would have loved to didn't get that opportunity.
Well, yeah, you definitely deserve to be, because you have been instrumental in so many things through the Family Safety Center, and also before that through the Southwest Memphis thing. But I mean, I know that I have never been instrumental from the inside dealing with domestic violence, but I have been associated with these, even when it was supposed to be started talking about domestic violence, and then cocaine and alcohol prevention and battered women, offering housing for them and helping them in several ways. And also through the non-profit and the radio show, I have tried to promote the evils of domestic violence and tried to see what can be done to stop that, prevent it, and maybe also help those victims. But again, you are the one who has been at the forefront. I wouldn't be wrong if I say that you have been at the forefront. There are other organizations also that deal with domestic violence, but the Family Safety Center itself was formed in such a way that it would directly be associated with the sheriff's department, the police department, and the legal system itself. So please tell us about that.
So I think the unique thing about the Family Safety Center, the model of the Family Justice Center, is that You pull together services in one location. It's sort of like a one-stop shop, and that's for a number of reasons. When someone is trying to find resources or assistance, oftentimes when you talk to survivors, it's very frustrating because a resource may be over here, somewhere over there. You got to figure out what the office hours are. This organization may have a different intake process than another organization. So it becomes very convoluted and complicated for folks to get to the resources that they need. So the idea with the Family Safety Center is that you have agencies with staff members from those different agencies that are co-located in one place. So when someone comes in, they're seeking help, they can talk to a number of representatives. So they can talk to a prosecutor while they're there, somebody from the DA's office, they can talk to an advocate, they can talk to someone who can help them find housing, they may talk to someone who can help them provide food stamps, benefits such as that. They may be able to talk to someone who provides legal support. So again, the idea is to have all those various resources in one location. And again, and also it helps in terms of all of those professionals are talking with each other. So you're actually collaborating on someone's case or a family's case. So you can hopefully get the best results that you can get for that family.
So you just now, just talking about it, mentioned so many things. It's a big list. I don't think that the work that it takes, the efforts, the time that it takes, it doesn't do justice to just the list that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So please help our listeners understand what it takes to deal with this kind of thing.
So there are a few things. One, just the communication that has to happen among the agencies. And keep in mind, the culture of a nonprofit organization is going to look quite different from law enforcement, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very kind of top down, you have a lot of rules or whatever. And so again, one is for the organizations and agencies to build trust with each other, mm-hmm. With one another. Have better communication and actually coordination that's happening. So that's one huge difference. The other thing is all of them being in one location together. Now that might sound very easy, but when you think about the requirements that law enforcement may have need in terms of just safety and precautions and what their setup has to be, you have to think through all of those logistics, okay? And you have to think about if someone comes, a family or individual comes in for resources, you have to think about, okay, what does that process look like, right? What does that intake process look like? Like, who's going to be the first person? What's going to be the face? Who's going to be the first person they talk to, right? And how are they introduced to the organization, right? What kind of information are you going to need to collect from them? And so you have to think through all of that. It's a lot of logistics, a lot of working through relationships, and a lot of communication that has to happen to make it work.
So to say a client, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
That would be the right word, the client, who's the victim. They are introduced to you by the law enforcement.
A lot of times, yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And many times they come to you directly.
Yeah,
or to the Family Safety Center.
Yeah, so there are a number of ways, and again, I'm no longer at the Family Safety Center, but of course, I spent years there. I was there almost 10 years, and so. Yeah, a lot of times, families, individuals, I will say victims and survivors, learn about the Family Safety Center through law enforcement, their contact with law enforcement. Maybe they had a call, they had to call in, 911 officer showed up, and then through that process, the officer would tell them about the Family Safety Center. Sometimes that call is made right then, so to make sure that an advocate gets to speak to that victim or survivor.
Whether it is day or night.
Doesn't matter. 24/7
right.
At any point in time, advocate would be available if an officer called and say, this person is in a situation where we're concerned that they're in a very dangerous situation. I think they may need housing. Go to a shelter, for example. that introduction would be made right there on the phone while that officer is still on site. Sometimes it would be through Family Safety Center also provided the temporary orders of protection. And so someone, and again, that's to keep someone away from them basically. And so they would come to the Family Safety Center for that, and then they would get introduced to an advocate, and then they would realize, oh, I can get access to all these other resources. But yeah, a lot of the calls come through law enforcement, but also sometimes victims and survivors are going to other agencies. They might go to, say, Metropolitan Interfaith Association, MIFA, or another social service agency, and they tell the staff person about their situation, that they're in a domestic violence situation, and they may say to them, let me give you some information about the Family Safety Center, and that's the other way that folks.
But they don't come directly to the family safety.
They can. Sometimes people would just show up. It's quite interesting that when I was at the Family Safety Center, the word on the street was that Memphis, Tennessee had a lot of resources for victims and survivors.
Okay.
So sometimes people would just get on a bus, say from Dallas, Texas, and show up to Memphis and show up to the Family Safety Center and say,
really?
I think y'all got more resources than where I came from.
Okay.
I heard that you all have a lot of resources. And yeah, they would just show up at the office.
And these are victims?
Yes, victims. Yeah.
And not non-profits that
No,
were
they're
catering to
victims.
that population. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, talking about resources, what kind of resources did you have?
Yeah, so it varied. So a few things. I will tell you, legal resources are typically one of the primary resources that a victim or survivor may need, and they may mean getting an order of protection, getting a divorce, child custody issues, child support issues. So legal support was always at the top. Housing, shelter is another one. If you're thinking about a person who's in a dangerous situation, they might need to leave their home and go to somewhere that is secure. So again, housing was always a big issue. And even after they may be at the crisis stage, oftentimes you're talking about individuals that are having to rebuild their lives. And so again, they may still need some level of assistance with housing. And so again, that might look like an apartment, something sort of like that. And so again, housing was always a big issue as well. And then another big resource was the order of protection. There's a process to go through, and it might be difficult to understand that. So we had advocates on site that would help folks to complete those forms, understand that process.
So even if a person has absolutely no idea, has never ever done that, because when you're doing and going through these processes, you get bogged down by all of these things, and you just cannot move forward, and the language might be different. So you had all of these people to not only just walk them through, but actually hold their hand,
their hand
and walk them through it. So that is wonderful. And what has your experience been? How does it lead to that?
So ask me a little more in terms of
what leads to domestic violence?
Oh wow! So I wish there was like a simple answer to that. I think there are a lot of things that lead to domestic violence. I think some things are cultural in terms of just how we view women and girls. So I think that plays into it. I think also how we view masculinities. Sometimes men feel like, being a protector, being a provider, being strong, and sometimes that leads to controlling behavior. If someone has maybe not the healthiest view about what it means to be a man, sometimes people have seen it growing up, like domestic violence was a thing in their households. And so
now, let me pause you there. It is said that when people grow up in a domestic violence situation, which is called as child domestic violence, there's a term called as, which means that they are experiencing domestic violence
and they're exposed to it, right? Yes.
So my question is, how come they don't realize I shouldn't be doing this and I will not do this?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, right? And that's very logical to think that way. Sometimes it's if that father say was abusive, that son may realize and see that the father did get what they wanted, right, by using these tactics, whether it was physical or emotional abuse. The father was able to get what they wanted from the mother.
We are talking about emotional abuse and verbal abuse. Men would say that, hey, I get abused.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, the thing about a family safety center, it serves everyone. So oftentimes, yes, people think about women as victims, but you also see men coming to the family safety center as well. And that abuse may look differently. Oftentimes, it was emotional and verbal abuse that you would see in those cases. Now, occasionally, you would see women who would get physical, become physically violent with their male partners, but oftentimes it was emotional and verbal abuse.
So then, does that give them a leeway that, oh, because she was emotional and she became physical, no big deal?
You know, if you talk to folks in the general public, they view domestic violence as physical. But really, when you talk to advocates, they see domestic violence as someone who's trying to use power control over their partner. And so they can look like a lot of different ways, right? They can look like financial abuse, I'm controlling whether or not this other person works or not. I'm controlling whether or not this person has access to money or not, right? I'm managing the financial expenses to the point of if this person is to get anything, I have to give it to them. There are all kind of ways that they can play out. It could be spiritual abuse, meaning I don't allow this person the freedom to practice their faith. And so oftentimes, again, people only look at it as physical, but we saw all kind of tactics that abuse of people who were abusive would use to have power and control over their partners.
So basically, when you're talking about spiritual, you're talking about religious control.
Yes.
That this is my religion and you cannot do your religion.
Right, or you cannot practice your faith. Right, you can't go to the meetings. You can't pray. Yeah, we would say. Sometimes it can look like sexual abuse. They're all meaning that I will not allow this person, say, use any kind of contraceptives. So it can look various ways.
So if partners have difference of opinions because you've just brought up contraceptives, if one person says that I want to have a kid, the other person says no, who would be right?
So it depends on whether or not, oftentimes it depends on whether or not that other person feels safe enough to be able to say, I'm not in agreement and let's have a conversation. Again, a lot of times fear is being used to manage the other person's behavior. So oftentimes we see, again, heterosexual relationships where oftentimes the woman was being abused. She did not feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't want to have a child. Maybe they're not in the best situation in terms of emotionally and what's going on in the relationship. But oftentimes they wouldn't have the ability to say that without being threatened with physical harm. If that makes sense.
Okay, so now let us reverse the situation and say that the man doesn't want to have a child. Yeah. So what would be
that? Yeah, that may be someone. And again, let me say this: domestic violence is about a pattern, and so again, it may be that maybe the woman lies and says she is using, maybe she's using the birth control pill and she's not, right? It's manipulation. It's various types of manipulation. Again, there are all kinds of tactics where this person's trying to have power and control over that partner. So yeah, it's not just even in heterosexual relationships. We saw a lot of same-sex couples as well. So again, the focus is on, is there a pattern? Is there a pattern of abuse? Is there a pattern of manipulation happening? And that's oftentimes how you can think about whether or not this is domestic violence or isolated situation.
Okay.
And I will tell you, over the years, oftentimes folks may not even realize they're in an abusive relationship because sometimes they're so into it, right? They're dealing with this on a daily basis, or maybe an incident only happens every few months or so, that they haven't stepped away from it enough to have some perspective about what's going on. And they may think something is off, right? They may think, okay, this is just a bad marriage, right? But when they go in there and start talking to an advocate, they start to realize, oh, this is unhealthy. Oh, my partner shouldn't have me feeling this way, or my partner shouldn't be able to control but when I eat and what time I eat. So they start to, it's kind of starting to help them think through it and connect the dots and see that there is a pattern there.
So I currently also serve on the city and county's domestic violence task force with Bill Gibbons in it, and so many people from the sheriff's department, from the DA's office as well, some from the University of Memphis and other organizations, including Family Safety Center, Kindred Place, and other non-profits that cater to victims of domestic violence. And in one of the meetings we had, one person said, oh, you know what, we were questioning the perpetrator, and we said, you did this, and he said, so what? I mean, how is that domestic violence? I mean, that is not domestic violence. So what this guy was saying is that people do not know that this constitutes domestic violence. So there has to be some measures that need to be taken. And my take was, I need to use this medium to spread to the people and let them know that in many cases, you might not be aware of what domestic violence is. The definition of domestic violence may be a whole lot more and vast. And you must be saying, what? This is not domestic violence. But you could be booked for domestic violence, or there might be 10 different things that will constitute that towards that pattern, like you mentioned. And then it might act against that person, whether it's a guy or a woman, doesn't matter. But that pattern is what people many times do not realize, that constitutes domestic violence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to say that please reach out to us and find out what it is. And we are going to have many other people also on our show to define, because the definition of domestic violence is not one sentence. It is very in-depth. And there are many acts and activities that lead to domestic violence and are defined as domestic violence. And many times they might go unreported.
Yes, oftentimes.
And the fact is that because what's the big deal? They have an argument, they have this, they have that. And you do not realize that this could get you in big trouble. The problem is that once you are in that side, then your life is destroyed. Because being in for domestic violence then turns your life upside down. So it is essential that you realize that you should not be going to that place at all, be far from it. So continuing our discussion, that you have these kinds of resources, why is it not coming down? Again, I know there's a lack of information going from the resources and the sources that ought to take that information to the general public. And I'm giving an explanation, of course, that if I am interviewed by the news channel, because it is watched by thousands, I end up being if I talk for like 15 minutes, then I end up being there for 3 or 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, or 1 minute. So the entire message is not conveyed. What we want to do is, without editing it, we want all the message in its entirety to go to the public. But why is it not being done?
Well, I think there are a few reasons.
Okay.
One, the more awareness you do, for instance, you've have been putting the word out, like what is domestic violence, right? Putting the word out like you're doing today. The more awareness you do, the more reporting you're going to get, right? And so folks who may not have known they were in a domestic violence situation now realize that they are. So they may reach out for assistance, right? They may reach out for help. So that might be one reason. You never know, again, whether the numbers are going up just because there's more awareness. And so you have folks who are not reporting, now they are reporting that they're in situations and they're actually seeking help because they now know there are actual resources out there for them. So that might be one reason. The other reason too, another reason we feel that numbers may not be going down is the economic realities. That there are not a lot of safety nets with COVID. We definitely saw the numbers go up with COVID.
Mm-hmm. So it is both domestic violence as well as crime.
Yeah, exactly.
And crime with gun violence.
Yes, and there's a percentage. There is a high percentage of, say, for instance, domestic violence homicides that include a gun. So there are laxed gun laws in Tennessee, and so again, it makes it more accessible for folks to have guns, which that makes particularly women and their households more vulnerable to domestic violence and potentially a domestic violence homicide. So that is another thing. There's a high crime rate in Shelby County, Memphis and Shelby County, right? And just the resources are thin, right? In terms of there's a lot of different, there's gang violence going on, there's gun violence going on, and then you have domestic violence, and again, the resources are stretched thin. That's another reason too, potentially why the numbers are going down. And then the other thing is domestic violence is much more challenging to address than other types of crime, because you have to think about it. Unlike, say, somebody being robbed, they might not have any relationship to that person.
They have absolutely none. They will not see them,
right.
Not before,
right.
Not after, yeah.
Domestic violence is totally different, right? This is someone you're involved with. This is someone you built a relationship with, right? And so oftentimes, particularly for the individual that's been victimized, they may want to give their partner multiple chances to change. In fact, that typically is what the case is. They want the violence to stop. They don't necessarily want their partner to go to jail or prison. They just want the violence to stop. And so once you get law enforcement involved, as you mentioned, right, then the system takes over. The criminal justice system decides on how they're going to address that case. So again, now you're caught up in the system. So a lot of times, I will say this for women, they may be concerned about the fact that they want the violence to stop, but their partner might lose their job. Right? So then if they got a domestic violence charge facing them, or they got an order of protection deal against them, that's potentially their partner losing their job. So they're concerned about that, right? So there are lots of reasons, again, why domestic violence numbers may stay up there, because it's a more challenging crime to address, but again, because of the relationships between the people who are involved in the situation.
So there was a campaign a few years ago, Stop.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm,
I mean, there was...
Like the Memphis Area Women's Council was involved with?
Probably.
Yeah.
And I think Steve Cohen was also on the poll. I don't know if he was one of those people who helped the campaign, and what I heard is that had an impact.
Yeah.
A positive impact, that domestic violence came down and things like that. When it comes to gun violence, we have billboards talking about that gun violence is jail time and all of that.
Right.
And we have ads on the TV also, and radio, Stop Man, and those kinds of things, that gun violence is this and that and it's bad. Why is there not that kind of a campaign when it comes to domestic violence?
Yeah, that's a good question. On and off, there have been campaigns, as you mentioned a few years ago. There was a huge campaign to, using all sorts of, types of media to get the word out. There's probably not the large level, large scale coordinated, campaign that you mentioned. There are always efforts to, get the word out, whether, you're going and talking to a church or a school or a youth group or whatever the case is. Yeah, I think it's just limited resources, limited financial resources to be able to continue those type
I want
of
to say
campaigns.
that this is free. Whoever wants to come and promote the stop, the detour, and a complete roadblock for domestic violence, this is a medium that you can come to talk about it and let that message go out to the public.
Yeah.
You have been on the show before. We have talked about it, and you also have given me some literature of different kinds of things, of how it is defined, that financial holding that person, and there are different ways. And I think it was
There's
kind of
a
circle,
wheel, the power and control wheel.
So tell me about it.
Yeah, so I think, again, in terms of understanding what domestic violence is, again, it's again the idea that one partner is trying to exert power and control over another partner, right? And this wheel shows the various ways what that looks like. So again, I think there are like 9 areas how this plays out. And again, I won't mention all of them, but one is financial, one is spiritual, one is manipulation, one is just, kind of coercion and threats. The other, folks know, physical, there's social, sexual, so there are multiple ways, again, that this can play out. And oftentimes, again, people think about the physical, right? That people think about the physical violence, but oftentimes don't think about the emotional and the verbal violence that's going on. Oftentimes those are going hand in hand. In fact, the emotional and kind of verbal violence may start way before the physical violence starts. But again, oftentimes people only just think about the physical violence, and they don't think about all these other ways that this partner can be exerting power and control over their partner.
However, when it comes to legal action against the perpetrator, it is only the physical act.
It's the physical, including sexual violence.
Sexual. So now, if the sexual act is not, I don't know, having rough sex or things like that, if there is a sexual activity, what would constitute legal action? For example, if the person says no.
Yeah, it's similar to consent, right? If that person does not have consent, and that person, say for instance, overpowers that other person, makes them participate in sexual acts that they did not want to participate in, that would be considered sexual assault, right? And of course, there's the legal language in terms of how that's defined, but I'm kind of simplifying. Basically, if you don't have consent, and you force this person to engage in sexual acts that they're not comfortable with and they have not agreed to, that could constitute as sexual assault. So even if the two people are married or in a relationship.
So to some extent, I'm just playing the devil's advocate. To some extent, they say that one person might be shy. And 99% of the time it would be the woman who is shy. And she might want it, but saying no because she's shy. Might not want to. Maybe it's the first time some activity is being done, and then she partakes in the activity. Would then that also be called or would define as illegal or illegal?
Yeah, so first let me say, I'm not an expert when it comes to sexual assault. So my education and knowledge is limited, and I will say this: if a person is saying no, and again, there's been a lot of conversation around consent, because sometimes consent may not be a verbal yes, right? But you're paying attention to this person's body language, right? You're paying attention to how this person is interacting with you. I would say if there's any question whether or not this person feels uncomfortable, stop and have a conversation. But again, you're talking about someone who's abusive, so they don't care whether or not their partner is uncomfortable or not,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, so they want to showcase
Their power, their domination over their partner, so that so they're not going to care whether or not their partner is feeling uncomfortable or not, or this person or their partner saying this does not feel right to me, this does not feel good to me, but they are exerting their domination over their partner, which is a form of abuse. So again, that's how that plays out oftentimes.
I see. And again, I'm just stressing
Sure,
some
sure.
more. At that moment, if one partner goes along with it and later on decides, no, I didn't want to do it, and say, hey, you know what, I'm
Yeah.
going to make a big deal out of it, and complain. So how do you prove that, no, we were in it together?
Yeah, it can be difficult. So
Right,
so there's the part of it that an advocate, working with someone who's in an abusive situation, and an advocate is there and kind of holding that person's hand, helping them, come up with a plan. Maybe they want to exit the relationship. That might look totally different from
So
whether or not.
if somebody has already planned to exit a relationship and the other person is not ready for it,
Right.
so if you come up with some strategy, oh, this will make him leave me, or make her leave me.
Well, I will say this, sometimes you see a difference in terms of how, say a family safety center may approach an issue in terms of, whether or not there's so-called evidence or not that something has happened to them. If that person said, I think I'm being victimized, they say I'm a victim, the agencies will believe that person. The advocacy organization is going to believe that person, and then start to help them to think through what are their steps, how do you want to kind of think through what the possibilities and options are. Now that may look a lot different than criminal justice, where you're getting law enforcement involved. Now here's the district attorney. Now if it's a he say she say thing, or she said she say type of thing, there may not be enough evidence to prosecute that case. So again, that may, when you were talking to Judge Gilbert, that may look totally different again at how that situation is handled through the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, there's not enough evidence. Oftentimes, there is just one person's word against the other person. So there may not be enough to, again, to convict or prosecute that person using the criminal justice system. But that person's been victimized could still figure out ways if they want to leave that relationship, because they just don't feel safe in it anymore. Then advocates could still help them take steps.
And there are, as we say, there are many resources. Please do not hold back. You need help. If you feel that you need help, you can reach out to so many resources that we have in our city and county. They will be able to determine whether you really do need help, or they say, well, no, this might not be an issue, or they can give you ways of getting out of that situation before that kind of situation arises.
I'm gonna tell you, it's more likely that oftentimes what we would see when I was at the Family Safety Center is that individuals that have been victimized often downplay. They minimize it, and so oftentimes the situation is much worse than they're somewhat in denial. Because once you face it and that is an issue, then you have to take steps. You feel like you have to take some action. So oftentimes, victims will minimize what's going on. So it's more likely that things are worse than that person.
I see. So because of the existence of that relationship for so long,
yeah,
they do not realize, they do not understand the depth of the problem.
Right.
And also
give you an example. One of the tools, at least when I was at the Family Safety Center, the advocates we used was a calendar. So you had to think back when things have happened, and when they start documenting, oh my gosh, this is happening once a week or twice a week, when they really might have thought, oh, this happened once every few months. But when you start to write it down, it's like, oh my goodness, this is happening, and it's escalating. Things are getting worse. So maybe it started off with a slap. The next thing, it was a fist that partner used. The next thing, they're putting their hands around that person's neck. So oftentimes, when someone kind of steps back and start to look at things and start to connect the dots, they realize things are worse than what they
So, which organizations actually educate people in realizing that? How many organizations?
There are lots of organizations. Again, Family Safety Center. There's also the YWCA that they have a women abuse services program. I think they also serve men as well now. I think you mentioned some organizations as well. Some, agencies are, larger social service agencies, but also may provide some resources like a MIFA. So again, there are various organizations out there. And in fact, if folks went to the Family Safety Center website, they would probably see a list of those agencies and organizations.
So at least in the DV task force that I'm associated with, there are about 50 to 60. And in the list of emails we have,
yes, the area of legal services, there are lots of different agencies.
So, again, the idea, of course, is to take this topic, this subject that is in a way crippling our society, and take it to people who need the help, and also to people who do not realize that what they might be doing can constitute as domestic violence, and it could act against them. So this should also be used as a learning tool, a learning technique, and a curve, so that the curve not only does not go up, but it stops right there. It comes drastically down. It will not happen overnight. It will take some time. So it is extremely necessary that you understand what domestic violence is. And I would like to say that I meet people from various ethnicities, from many countries. If it is in the Middle East, the take is that, oh, you cannot get out of the house until you wear a burqa, you cover yourself. But here, if the husband says, oh, you cannot step out of the house, then that leads to abuse and control. That in different, like in Middle East, is that is the norm. That is how it is supposed to be. So no matter what culture you are from, no matter where you are from, it is for you to understand that, okay, if this is an abuse, or this is the culture that you have grown up in, and it is perfectly all right for you to follow that culture, your history, your heritage, no matter what. But if you are over here, you have the choice to say that this is right or this is not right.
And I will say this, I'm glad you brought up the cultural differences. It does make it more challenging and more difficult, especially maybe someone is coming from a different culture, right? Maybe an immigrant, maybe their status, their legal status here, right, may be complicated, and so oftentimes there's a lot of isolation. So again, someone who's been victimized may not know the resources because language is a barrier, right? Sometimes they might not know the resources because, again, they may not know anybody outside of their community, right? And so maybe relationships are looked in a certain, like you were mentioning, in a certain way, and it may not be thought of as abuse, right? So all of those things come into play, and it does make it just that much more challenging for someone if they're from a different culture or even have a different language, first language, to access resources.
Right, and just talking about that, we have a whole lot of Hispanic population.
Yeah.
So we have Casalu that caters to that.
Yes.
So if there is a barrier, language barrier in that realm, so we have that. We might not have anybody from the Arabic speaking or some other.
Now there is a language line that advocacy organizations have access to. So anyone that comes in, say to the Family Safety Center, their staff members will have access to a language line, and so again, there is a way to do that, even if someone is deaf as well. So there are resources available.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So again, to everybody, there are a whole lot of resources. Please avail of them. It is extremely necessary that we have a society that is nice, and that is what we believe in. we believe in fostering positivity through the promotion of love, peace, and harmony. So, Miss Olliette, Marie Drobot, we thank you as always for coming on our show and talking about matters that really matter to the public. They are very uncomfortable subjects,
Yeah.
but you have been at the center of this and you were the right person to talk about it. So, thank you for coming on our show.
Well, thank you for having me here today.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you. Until next time, have a wonderful time. And when you tune into our show, know that you are going to listen to some topics that sometimes are not necessarily comfortable, but we look forward to promoting and fostering positivity in our society. Thank you so much and have a great day. And thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.